Hello again, everybody. This is Craig Evans of Autism Hangout, and thank you for tuning into the Ask Dr. Tony show, where Dr. Tony Atwood answers your questions about autism. Hello, Dr. T. It's great to see you again.
Hello, Craig. Good to be back on the air and fascinating questions. Let's start exploring.
Excellent. We're going to start with being diagnosed for Asperger's HFA. The first one is about avoidant personality disorder and social anxiety disorder. My highly intelligent husband is about to be diagnosed with avoidant personality disorder, but also has many traits that are applicable to social anxiety disorder. In reading all of the Asperger blogs, I recognize that Asperger aspects are a part of his character. How do Asperger's, avoidant personality, and social anxiety correlate, and how can each of them be distinguished?
Very, very good question. We're talking here about avoidant personality disorder. And one of my concerns is that once a person is recognized as having autism spectrum disorder, or they know that they're different, then subsequent to that, they can develop what we call a personality disorder as an adjustment to being different. Sometimes it's narcissistic, I'm superior to other people. Sometimes it's multiple personality as you act various people and so on. But the avoidant personality is important because it describes someone who feels inadequate in social situations, very sensitive to negative evaluation, fear of criticism, disapproval and rejection, and being shamed and ridiculed. Now, my perspective is that this is a personality disorder, yes, but is often a reaction because of the peer group throughout childhood. Now, we talk about bullying and teasing, and that's horrible in many ways. But clinically, I've found what is far more hurtful and pathological is humiliation and rejection and feeling a fool. And it's that look and it's that dismissal rather than the thump that can occur. Now, what can happen then is that the person will anticipate in many situations that they're going to have disapproval, criticism, being looked at, not successful, and so on. So that's external. But another thing that can occur is self-criticism. And that is, it's not come from social criticism from parents or necessarily from teachers. It's fear of making a mistake and having low self-esteem and almost setting yourself up, almost with a filter system in your perception of noticing things, and anything that is ambiguous is then perceived as derogatory and negative. Oh, they're looking at me, etc. When actually they just happen to be looking just past your shoulder. Now, that can explain its origins. The question is, what do we do? Now, here the person clearly needs positive feedback for the social engagement that they have. When you're socializing, you don't get a round of applause. You don't get a tick in the box. You just have to assume you're doing okay. So it means that if this is a description of a husband, if the wife could sometimes script him as to what's going to happen and what's going to say, every so often in the social engagement, give him feedback of what he's done right, etc. So it's improving abilities, but more importantly, improving confidence. So he needs much more positive feedback and someone there to guide him that look was very difficult to understand what they meant, but it wasn't a negative look. But the assumption is, if I don't understand it, it's obviously derogatory.
Let's keep on a theme here. The question has to do with psychosis. Dr. Tony, I'm looking for information about autism and psychosis for my brother. He's been on antipsychotic medication for many years.
Oh, another very important question. The level of psychosis in autism spectrum disorder is the same as in the general population. 1 in 50 are likely to develop a psychosis. What is a psychosis? Well, in a way, it's delusions and hallucinations. And what we do find is that the Aspie way of thinking can be very rigid, one-track mind, and almost delusional. But it also means that in a disturbance of reality, those with Asperger's are very good at logic, but not very good with emotions. And when you have very powerful emotions, logic disintegrates. So the person may appear psychotic because their anxiety or depression or anger is so great. It's a disturbance of reality. And that intense emotion prevents grounded, positive, logical thinking. Now, usually, antipsychotic medication is prescribed in ASD not to treat psychosis, but as a sedative. Mm-hmm. It's to knock the person out. It's to take away the energy. And as a matter of expediency, to help that person cope or family members cope with them, the medication sedates, but is not prescribed to treat clear symptoms of psychosis. So it's often prescribed for reasons different to its original design. Now, my concern is that we have no idea of the long-term effects of such medication. However, from my 40 years clinical experience, if you're coming off antipsychotic medication, you must come off very, very slowly. Mm-hmm. But it also means that that medication has acted as a suppressant for emotions. Now, as you reduce the medication, it's almost as though they've been suppressed and eventually will be released too much, because the brain's natural way of coping with emotions, psychologically and biochemically, has been artificially adjusted by the medication. So you're going to get a rebound effect. So it must be reduced. If he's been on antipsychotic for many years, it will be several years for him to come off it. And so I am thinking, really, it may well be that it will help him, must be reduced slowly, and provide alternative strategies for emotion management.
Excellent plan. The next category is disclosing a diagnosis. Our 9-year-old son was recently diagnosed with high-functioning autism. He reads at an advanced level for his age, so we're trying to find a book that he can refer to that helps him understand in a non-patronizing way. I'm sure you have some book suggestions.
Yes, thank you, Craig. I'll give you a spotter's fee. Because, the first book I would obviously recommend is this one. Is my book. Now, the reason for this original book, I know it was written a number of years ago, but the content is the same. It will be eternal in a way. But I wrote it that a person with a reading age of 12 plus should be able to understand it. Now, if he's 9 years old, enjoys reading, it is not too heavy. It is a fairly accurate and positive view. So one of the first things I would suggest if he wants a book on it, it's this one.
Excellent.
However, there are other books that I would recommend. A friend of mine, Kathy Hoopman, has written some excellent fiction for kids around the age of this particular child. Mm-hmm. She originally wrote what's called The Blue Bottle Mystery. And it is a fiction story, very easy for him to read, probably in an hour or two. Mm-hmm. But the central character has Asperger's in a positive way. And it's part of a trilogy. There's a series of books subsequently. Of Mice and Aliens is the next one, which is a great Star Trek spoof. But I would recommend this as bedtime reading. Now, the interesting thing is that the Blue Bottle Mystery is now in the format of cartoons, etc. So if he's a good reader, he may not need that. But what I found fascinating from Kathy, if he's 9 years old, is this. It's science fiction. And it's science fiction of a fascinating world. It's called Elemental Island. And it's an island where all the Aspies have gone to for various reasons. And neurotypicals have been obliterated in a nuclear war. But Elemental Island remains and thrives. And it's a story of what would life be like if Aspie was the vast majority of people. And there's a neurotypical born there and goes through all the challenges of that type of environment. And there are some people actually who are neurotypical who have survived, and it's how they meet and the two cultures and so on. Mm-hmm. So I would recommend Elemental Island as a great read. Another one is Different Like Me, and it's a series of descriptions of famous people in history that include Immanuel Kant, Sophie Germain, Pierre Mondrian, Andy Kaufman, Diane Fossey, etc. Each description is of a famous person who had Asperger characteristics, and he may then recognize, both in the sciences and the arts and in the caring professions, there have been people with Asperger syndrome. So that's what I would suggest.
All positive. All right, The next one is somebody else that's worried about other people learning about his diagnosis. I'm 38 years old. I have not been officially diagnosed yet, but I am in the process. Once I do get diagnosed, I will have a hard time talking to my mom about it. She thinks she knows it all and will be offended if I get a diagnosis. She will be in denial or take it personal. I'm a little upset that she didn't recognize my symptoms at a younger age and get me actual help instead of sending me to institutions that didn't help either. Clearly, this person has the feeling they're already on the spectrum and wishes mom would have seen this before.
I think this is an increasing phenomenon I experience of adults who find out about Asperger's from the media in particular, and then suddenly this seems to fit. Often they've been to psychiatric services where something has been described, anxiety for example, which is, yes, it's a problem you have, but it's never been something which covers the entirety of the different profile. And then on reading Asperger's, there's a light bulb moment of suddenly realizing, wow, that describes me perfectly. So it's a revelation for the person. Now, they've got to find a professional who also recognizes that and is able to complete the diagnostic assessment. But this person is 38 years old. When he was at school, we did not know about Asperger, so that's not his mum's fault, because they wouldn't have known. She would also have been guided by professional advice at the time. And so she has kept on that particular attitude. And it's a paradigm shift for her in terms of Asperger syndrome, because autism is the severely disabled, can't talk, flapping, institutionalized person. And her son doesn't represent her concept of autism. Now, she needs to take time to process the information and to learn it. Now, hopefully, if someone in authority, the person who conducts the diagnostic assessment, I would think it would be worthwhile for that person to talk to his mother, to give some degree of credibility to what her son is describing, but also for her to take time to cope with a paradigm shift and change how she perceives and understands him. And it's not going to be easy, but I think it is something, if the man concerned could be patient with her.
Okay, very good advice. The next category is getting and keeping a job. My son, who is 17 years old, is currently looking for work. He also has developmental delays. How will he go about getting a job or even choosing a career?
Ooh, this is a tricky one. It's something here in Australia we've recognised for some time. And the government is concerned that people should not be on welfare if they have the potential for employment. And the way I say it is, a good job is better than Prozac as an antidote to depression. What we've done in Australia, and I would recommend this in other countries, is that the government has provided funding for employment agencies to specialise in autism spectrum disorders. Here in Brisbane, we have 3 organisations. And what they do is that they have a knowledge of autism in its whole range of expressions, and have their staff trained in the area, but also being able to find a job that's autism friendly, from sensory sensitivity to attitudes, etc. And then support the person in their application, in rehearsing for the job interview. It's rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. What are the questions? How to reply? And also support the person when they are in the job. As far as the government's concerned, this is great because the person's now a taxpayer. Because asking a parent to have that ability, I think, is very, very difficult. They really do need somebody who can speak, employment speak, of what are the advantages of the person with Asperger's. Now, thank you, Craig, because you've actually promoted something else I'm doing. With my colleagues, Michelle Garnett and Jake, we are writing a program called Thriving. And it's to help those with Asperger's syndrome thrive in a job setting. Mm-hmm. It includes stress management, sensory issues, organizational and planning, the social element, the misreading social cues, etc. And it's 5 3-hour sessions where you have a workbook and you go through all the challenges that you face, but you end up with a final workbook that you can use to explain to your employer mm-hmm. the qualities you have and the challenges you have. Now, we're currently evaluating it. It should be available online. That's the new trendy way to download mm-hmm. sometime early next year. And it's called Thriving, because we recognize that too many of the adults we see, their despair is due to unemployment. And the thing is, many companies are, interestingly, very keen on changing their philosophy. This is my personal opinion. I think a lot of big international companies are feeling embarrassed about not paying tax. So they're trying to do a public relations of how benevolent we are in employing people with disabilities. Mm. And so in talking to people at big banks, information technology, they're also realizing that such individuals can be very good employees and very helpful. So there's a paradigm shift now for the employers of big companies. These are the CEOs saying we have corporate responsibility, we should train our staff in accommodating that, and that's what I've been working on. So for this particular family, it's going to be difficult, but I think what they may do is go and have a look at some of the books that exist already. Jessica Kingsley Publishers, jkp.com, mm-hmm. have got about at least 10 books on employment. Some written by Rudy Simone. Temple Grandin has written an excellent one. Mm-hmm. So I think they need to read up about what's been written before, and then, unfortunately, they will have to do the legwork mm-hmm. of finding the right job and supporting the person.
Mm-hmm. The next category is a big one. It's meltdowns. Our granddaughter has high-functioning autism, or Asperger's. She will be 9 years old very soon. We're having a hard time with discipline. What type of discipline will an Asperger's child benefit?
The simple answer is none. When you make threats or consequences in a meltdown, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. The person at that stage is in such an intense level of emotion, their frontal logical thinking mind has, I'm afraid, switched off. You can threaten them with chopping their fingers off. You can promise them $1 million. It's going to make no effect. You just have very intense emotion, and consequences are not going to be cognitively processed. Now, this doesn't mean to say that there shouldn't be consequences, but when the meltdown is over and they can cope with that. But this is a very important question, because meltdowns can occur very early in that person's life and may continue if you're not careful. What I'm going to do is explain the nature of the meltdown and some strategies of what to do. Now, a meltdown is usually overload of sensory, social, cognitive. Sensory, too many bright lights, too much noise. Social is too many people. Cognitive is in terms of too much information, overload, the fuse goes. Mm-hmm. And the person is completely lost in that intense experience. Now, a strategy. Most of the people watching this will have a GPS in their car or know what it is. And I want you to imagine you're going to a destination and you're sitting next to your partner and you type in where your destination is and you follow the directions. And it says, at the next junction, turn left. Mm-hmm. But you're busy, you're distracted, things are going on. And you go straight over the junction. And your partner goes, what the do you think you're doing? We're going to be late, I should be driving, you don't know how to drive, you don't know that, and has a meltdown because whatever it is. Now, the GPS does not go, what the devil do you think you're doing? I just told you to turn left. You are obviously a woman driver because you don't know your left from your right. How many times have I got to tell you how to drive and you don't do it? I am a waste of your expense, etc. Don't focus on what they did wrong. Focus on what to do right, but in a voice that's calming and reassuring. Mm-hmm. So in that meltdown, it is very important. Don't focus on the damage or whatever it is that's occurring or your feelings in that situation. It is calmly, GPS voice, what to do to repair the situation. So that's my advice for a meltdown. Now, obviously, afterwards, you may say, okay, we need to learn from this. And you start off with the child's perspective. Okay, from your perspective, this, right? Okay, now from my perspective, this. We need to learn from this. Mm-hmm. So if you feel like this or you feel you're about to lose it, I need to know because I can help you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the idea is help, not discipline. Because again, once you reach a certain point, consequences and punishment aren't going to work. What works with ASD is logic. Mm-hmm. But also prevention is better than cure. So you need to say, okay, I need to remember that when there are too many bright lights, too many people, you're sensitive, you could have a meltdown. So I need to watch the situation. But if you feel a sense of overload, please tell me a secret word or whatever it is. I can't cope. Mm-hmm. Then we will go to a separate room. I'll ask you to close your eyes. We will take a break from what's going on. Mm-hmm. So that's my recommendation for meltdowns.
A GPS analogy is a beautiful one. Mm. Next is sensory issues. I'd like to know more about toe walking and if through therapy my daughter will stop.
Oh, I've never been really, I have been asked this question, but it's a fascinating one. The toe walking is usually with the younger children. And first of all, typical kids occasionally toe walk, and they like sort of bouncing around a bit. But with autism, it can become a regular form of movement. Now, in autism, there is a popularity of trampolines, swings, horse riding, and music. And the key theme through all that is rhythm. And that's what you can do with toe walking. It's almost like having your own trampoline or bounce or rhythm. And so the person finds that sense of rhythm is needed in their life. And so that's what they will create. Now, there can be other issues. One is tactile. Some of the kids really don't like the sensation on their feet of socks or grass or sand or things like that, and will go on their tiptoes to avoid the pressure in that area. And now the difficulty is if it becomes a prolonged characteristic, surgery may be considered with tendons, etc., to stop it. So what we're looking for is a sensory assessment to see what's going on. And is it that the person is needing rhythm in a way? And so sometimes listening to music on headphones will provide you with the rhythm that you don't need to do. Now, the problem with the toe walking is often the kid is doing it and doesn't really recognize they're doing it. So you need a signal of basically to, or a sort of walking or something like that to remind the child, not in a critical sense, that basically you need to flat walk. Now, I find most kids grow out of it eventually and they're okay. So if the parents can be patient with that, but look at the sensory, especially rhythm and tactile elements that may explain it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The next category is intimacy, dating, sex, and marriage. Please explain how a 22-year-old adult with Asperger's perceives social and sexual maturity if he has the social maturity of a 12-year-old.
Okay, he's 22, so he has the physical maturity of a 22-year-old, and that is in sexual response, erections, etc. So those will have occurred in line with puberty as a natural process. But his level of social emotional maturity is that of a 12-year-old, and also his knowledge of friendship and relationships will be very young. Now, when we say intimacy, dating, sex, and marriage, for a 22-year-old, as described, what he needs to learn about is friendship rather than the dating game, etc., and how to meet people. And what we would express here is not intimacy, but liking. When you like someone, what could you say? What could you do? It's if you get to know them and like them, these are the compliments you could say that are appropriate and not embarrassing. So as a young man, he may say, I like your hair, rather than, I think you've got great tits. I think really doesn't go very well in should we say, dating. So he really needs to explore the relationship side of beyond friendship. Now, at our Minds and Hearts Clinic in Brisbane, we've been going through this in a program called Beyond Friendship, and includes the dating game. How do you know when someone likes you? How can you express that? Because you then got issues of stalking, where a simple act of kindness is perceived as more than was really intended. So you have someone needs to know what girls would like. And girls could talk to him about, we want someone who is trustworthy, is loyal, friendly, and all those sorts of things. Otherwise, he's going to get the idea of what it's supposed to be like from the media. And the media has a certain description which he may not fit with, and then feel despondent that I'm not like whoever is the current heartthrob of the time. Tom Cruise would be it, and I don't look like Tom Cruise, haven't got Tom Cruise's body, so I'll never be successful. So he needs to really learn about what do girls find attractive, what qualities has he got, and then to meet people and first become friends. How do you have a conversation with that person? Where might you like to go? And as you get to know them, then perhaps seek permission. Would it be okay to hold your hand, for example? So it's really understanding that. But my concern is if he's 22 and he's got the social maturity of a 12-year-old, he may well have internet access. And if his maturity is a 12-year-old, he may be interested in the bodies and a relationship with a prepubescent girl. Now, that's technically child pornography. So if that's his level of maturity and he is seeking access to images of that on the internet, he could then be arrested for the possession of child pornography, which is his level of maturity, and that could cause considerable difficulties. So my advice in that situation, he needs to understand friendship and the art of flirting, those sorts of things, rather than intimacy and dating at this stage.
Also under intimacy, dating, sex, and marriage, hi, I met a guy in a parking lot at the grocery store. He was in the Army for 10 years, has PTSD, and I'm convinced he's an Aspie. But I want to make sure he's not just a bad person. We have hung out about 5 to 7 times since we met. One time when we were hanging out, he basically sexually assaulted me and then claimed it was my fault, and the scary part was he had a machete sword around his torso. He's obsessed with rocks, and he rides his bike around all day looking for rocks, and he smokes cigarettes, and he drinks lots of energy drinks. He intrigues me a lot, but he has a lot of problems. I'm concerned, is he going through a lot and doesn't know how to handle sexuality? How does the Army affect Aspies? Well, clearly there's more in here than just the last question.
Indeed. If I take the last bit, how does the army affect Aspers? First of all, the army can be very appealing, the forces in general, because you have structure, hierarchy, purpose, clear rules, etc. And the army, you can be from a truck driver to an infantry person or a helicopter pilot. So it's very appealing that it will train you in various careers. You have an alternative family, I suppose, in a way, and that degree of predictability and certainty of role can be very appealing. Now, this person seems to have PTSD. Now, as a separate issue, the level of PTSD in Asperger's is very high. And I often have to distinguish between the Asperger's and PTSD with an adult that I see, maybe not from a war zone, but from, to a certain extent, from being sexually assaulted, bullied and teased. All those sorts of things cause great stress. So PTSD and ASD often go together and are a very particular combination with his own needs for therapy. Now, with this person, I don't know what's occurred, but it seems that it may well have been traumatizing for him in the military. The person who wrote this is clearly a very compassionate, caring, maternal person who has seen, I would say, a lame dog that needs to be taken in and looked after. But my thoughts on this are, this is a big problem and you can't solve it on your own. If he's ex-military, there will be rehabilitation services and you might encourage him to engage with those services for professionals to deal with the PTSD. If he has Asperger's syndrome, then you may talk to those agencies of a need for a diagnosis because it will affect treatment and support that he's going to need. Clearly, there are aspects of his life that suggest he could have Asperger's and he may have issues with regard to how to relate to people in intimacy, dating, and needs guidance. But whether this person who wrote this is the person to do that is debatable, and I would say needs help. Needs help from professional services from the army, also friends and relatives that can give guidance. And it's a big ask to do that. If she's prepared to do it, good on you, but you need reinforcements to support you.
Mm-hmm. Excellent advice. The next category is kind of a large one because there's a bunch of small areas of interest under just life with autism. And let's start with one that seems to be in the headlines these days as it relates to the autism community. Gender dysphoria. Is it possible for a male to have more of the typical female traits? And let's start. Could you give us a definition of the term gender dysphoria?
Gender dysphoria means you don't like the gender you are and you're thinking, would life be better perhaps if I changed gender? Would this meet my mind, my thinking? And it can be something that someone takes to a level of eventually becoming transgender, which involves medication plus surgery to change gender. Now, this is something that is only recently becoming recognized, and I'm getting more and more referrals, and sometimes there is a suggestion almost half of those who are referred to a gender dysphoria clinic, and in many cities they'll have those, have characteristics of ASD, often not diagnosed. Now, it's a very interesting question. Can the male have more of the typical female traits? Yes, in terms of not being macho, being kind and considerate. But these aren't considered masculine, tough. And when they get their view of football players and rock stars and things like that, they say, that's not me. I'm a kind, nice person, and associated with girls. And then sort of think, if they compare themselves with the stereotype male, they'll say, that's not me. And what I do strongly encourage is for Aspie males to be encouraged to recognize that masculinity is not exclusively macho. And it can be a good parent. It could be kind and considerate and compassionate and listening. These are not gender discrete conditions. They exist in both. So I often find that their sort of female traits, they dismiss as, no, that's not masculine, when they really do need to know and hear from other males that masculinity has a very broad sense and includes a caring, compassionate person. It's not the exclusive preserve of females. Now, within ASD, sometimes we find that the child, the boy with Asperger's, has always found other boys dismissive, bullying and teasing, but girls are kind and nice and have lots of friends. And then the belief can occur that if I wanted friends and a good social network, if I became female, I would have friends and it would be a cure for autism. Another component that can occur is feeling isolated, but in adolescence going through what are my gender preferences? I really don't know. Most people go through this of just awakening sexuality. And on the internet, may discover the whole range. You want information, and you don't get it from your peer group because you haven't got many friends, if any. So you take to the internet. And the internet will give you a long list of descriptions, and then you take more information. And you may go to a site and say, oh, this is interesting. And then you may be welcomed and encouraged in a particular expression of sexuality, which is very tempting and enjoyable, that people are saying, good on you, you do this, except you almost have a new family, you have a new culture of isolated, marginalized people, and this can be very tempting to have this group who are keen to know you, keen to explore your abilities. This can also occur with Asperger's with extremist political groups too, and recruitment for them. And so the person then starts to think, maybe this could be of benefit to me, and if you're not careful, then it becomes a special interest. And there's phenomenal knowledge and expertise that's acquired, but a determination of a single-minded characteristic of, I'm going to pursue this. Now, there's supposed to be counseling and time to consider this. No, I want it. I've made the decision. That's it. And parents are going, whoa, where did this come from? But there's another group who are within ASD who have felt they're the wrong gender, often from preschool years. And what can also occur is girls with Asperger's may have found boys simpler, easier to get on with, very practical in what you do. And I get their jokes and I'm good at mathematics, and they become a tomboy. And they may despise femininity. They may be quite concerned when they go through puberty that they're feminized and don't want to do that. And one of the pathways then to anorexia is to maintain an androgynous physique. And so the view there for the girl may be, I feel like the boys, would my life be dramatically changed and improved if I became a boy? And sometimes these characteristics have been there for many years. What we look at here in gender dysphoria, this is a major life-changing decision and must be taken very carefully. And one of the characteristics I look for as a clinician is underneath the person is saying, I don't like who I am. So when I work with the person, I say, look, whether you're male or female, I'm not concerned about that. I want you to have a positive sense of self, whatever your gender may be. So that's the area that I work on.
Mm-hmm. Are there any books forthcoming? Is there any more research coming out? Or is this just starting to emerge, this whole thing called gender?
It's just starting to emerge. When Lawson has transitioned from female to male, she's a friend of mine. Sorry, Wen would correct me. He, very difficult to say, he is a friend of mine. And I saw Wen at a conference a few weeks ago, and Wen has a beard, muscly arms and so on. And it was fascinating because her daughter was there and she shouted out, Mom, Mom! Of course, this very male character turned around to her. So there can be all sorts of interesting issues that may occur with that. So, no, there isn't the literature. The gender dysphoria clinics are saying, wow, we are screening people for ASD, and this is a major pathway. Are they genuine or not? Is it a special interest that has a use-by date?
Yes.
And when I follow those who have had the transition, some say, yes, it's been what I wanted, I'm happy, but a significant proportion will say, oh, my problems are still here.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure this is something we'll be talking about in the future, so I'm glad we got started on it in this particular episode. All right, more living with autism questions. Trouble with closure. I want to hear more about the trouble that we Aspies have with closures and understanding why about things is confusing.
Ooh, another interesting question. In terms of closure, in processing or working on a particular topic, it's almost like the mindset is calibrated to deal with that, and it's adjusted to solve the problem. But if someone says, okay, we're going to have to stop, or we can't finish it here, the person has great difficulty switching to a new mindset of needing the closure so that I can move on to something else. So you've got a teacher who says, okay, we're going to stop this now and return to it tomorrow. No, because I can't get this out of my head until there's been a satisfactory solution. Now, in a job, that's great, because they'll be there at 11 o'clock at night making it perfect. But you can't do that at school. You've got to change, and especially at high school. So it also means that the person has to have a full level of understanding. Otherwise, their mindset will become so focused on it, they can't do anything else. So that's one of the reasons for closure. Sometimes what I'll do is say, look, like on the old-fashioned video machines, you have pause, and we're going to need to do pause. And it means that there needs to be a transition of solitude or physical activity between the two activities to wipe the whiteboard clean. So you've got a clean whiteboard for the next activity. So rather than go straight into it, I now need to do something completely different, clear the whiteboard, I'm fresh, off we go.
Very good. Dr. Tony, I think we've come to the end of this particular session. I want to thank you for your time and your always considerate and thoughtful answers.
Thank you, Craig. Actually, I enjoy these sessions because they're great questions, and I've got to think on my feet and convey what may help in those situations. So I ask those who are watching, send in your questions and I'll see if I can answer them.
Mm-hmm. If you have questions you'd like to ask, please head over to autismhangout.com. There's a form. Fill out the form. And every 6 to 8 weeks, Dr. Tony and I try to arrange a time that we can sit down and go through as many of these questions as possible to bring you answers to your issues. We'll see you all again soon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Okay, bye.